Pull up a map of the world right now, and the whole planet fits in your hand. Every coastline drawn, every continent named, every ocean measured to the mile. You can trace a finger from one side of the earth to the other in a second, and you know, without even thinking about it, that it is all connected, all reachable, all there. The shape of the world is one of the first things you ever learned. You have never known a moment of your life when the planet was anything other than a finished, mapped, knowable thing. Now erase the map. Erase the very idea that the world has a shape at all. You are a human being far back in time, and no one, not you, not anyone who has ever lived, has any idea how big the world is or what it contains. There is no destination, because no one knows there is anywhere to go, and yet, somehow, your descendants will end up on every continent on Earth. Here is the part we get wrong before we even start. They did not get there by setting out to. No ancient human ever looked at a map and decided to cross the world, because there was no map and no world to cross. The peopling of the entire planet happened without anyone ever intending to travel the planet at all. So how does a species reach everywhere when not a single individual is trying to go anywhere far? The answer begins with a truth that dissolves the whole way we picture it. This was never a journey. No person walked from Africa to the far corners of the earth. The spread of humanity happened so slowly that no one alive ever experienced it as movement. Each generation simply lived a little further out than the one before. A valley over, a coastline along, a few miles beyond where their parents had settled. A group would expand into the empty land next door, and their children into the land next to that, and their children beyond that again. Multiply those small steps across hundreds of generations and thousands of years, and the species creeps across a whole planet without a single soul ever taking a long trip. The great human migration was not a march. It was a slow tide, so gradual that the people carried by it never knew they were moving at all. But a slow tide still needs somewhere to flow, and for much of human history, the paths across the world were not open. Oceans blocked the way. Ice sheets sealed off whole regions. Deserts and mountains stood as walls. For long stretches, the routes that would carry humanity across the earth simply did not exist. And this is where the story takes its most surprising turn, because the doors that let humans spread across the world were not opened by humans at all. They were opened by the climate itself. The great force behind the spread of humanity was the Ice Age, or rather, the vast rhythms of freezing and thawing that gripped the planet across the deep past. When the world cooled and the great ice sheets grew, they locked up staggering amounts of the Earth's water, frozen solid across the north. And because that water came out of the oceans, the seas themselves dropped, fell by enormous distances, hundreds of feet lower than they sit today. As the oceans pulled back, they exposed land that is now drowned beneath the waves, vast stretches of seabed rising into the air, joining together places that today are separated by water. The falling seas built bridges. Continents that are islands now were once connected by broad plains of dry land, and across those temporary bridges, life could simply walk. The most famous of these vanished bridges connected the far northeast of Asia to the Americas. Today those two worlds are split by a stretch of cold sea. But when the Ice Age locked up the oceans, that sea drained away and became land. A wide, cold, grassy plain joining the two continents into one. And across it, without ever knowing they were crossing from one world into another, humans and the animals they followed walked into a hemisphere that had never known a single human foot. There was no epic voyage, no crossing of the unknown. There was just land and game to follow across it, and people living their lives a little further along it each generation, until one day their descendants stood in an entirely new world. A world reached not by daring, but by the slow walking of a bridge that the ice had quietly laid down for them. And the ice did more than build bridges between continents. It also opened and closed corridors within them. At the height of the freeze, great walls of ice could seal off whole regions, blocking the way south or north for thousands of years. Then, as the world warmed and the ice began to melt and retreat, passages opened up through it. Corridors of newly bare land threading between the shrinking ice sheets, or coastlines freed from the frozen grip, along which people could finally move into territory that had been locked away. The climate was not just a backdrop to the human journey. It was the gatekeeper, swinging the doors of the continents open and shut across the ages. And humans spread through them in the windows when they stood open. Now the myth worth killing. We imagine the peopling of the world as a triumph of deliberate exploration, brave bands setting out with purpose to conquer new lands. But the truth is humbler and stranger. For much of it, humans were not conquering the world so much as following it. Following the herds, following the coastlines, following the retreating ice and the opening land, spreading into whatever became reachable, whenever it became reachable. They were carried across the earth as much by the shifting planet as by their own will. And that raises the deepest question of all. What actually kept them moving, generation after generation, into land no one had ever seen? The honest answer is that they were following their food, and their food was always on the move. For most of this vast spread, humans lived by hunting and gathering, and that way of life has a built-in restlessness. You cannot stay in one place forever when you live off the land itself. The game moves with the seasons. The plants come and go. A valley that feeds you in one year thins out in the next. So groups followed the herds across the grasslands, drifted along the coasts where the sea offered its food, moved to where the living was good, and moved again when it was not. And when the group next door had already filled the good land, the natural drift was outward, into the empty country beyond, where no one else was yet competing for what it offered. Generation by generation, the simple pressure of finding enough to eat nudged humanity ever outward into the unclaimed edges of the world. But beneath the practical push of food, there was something else, that same restless spark we keep meeting in the human story, because not every step outward was forced. Some of it was simply the human refusal to leave the unknown alone. The land over the ridge, the coast around the headland, the country beyond the river, again and again, humans went to look, not only because they had to, but because they were the kind of creature that wanted to know what was there. The slow tide of migration was powered by hunger and climate, yes, but it was also powered by curiosity, by the deep human unwillingness to let a horizon stay unexplored. The two together, need and wonder, carried our ancestors into every corner of the earth. So picture the true shape of how ancient humans traveled the world. Not a bold expedition with a destination in mind, but a slow tide of life spreading outward, across thousands of years, each generation living a little beyond the last, following the herds and the coasts and the seasons, flowing across land, bridges the falling, seas laid bare, and through corridors the melting ice swung open, pushed by hunger and pulled by wonder, until a single species born in one corner of Africa had quietly filled a planet. No one ever set out to travel the world, they simply never stopped moving, and the world, step by patient step, was crossed. So the next time you hold the whole mapped earth in your hand and trace a finger across oceans and continents in a heartbeat, remember that the planet you find so small and known was crossed. The first time, by people who never knew where they were going. That effortless, complete world is the inheritance, built not by a single great journey, but by countless small ones, by generation after generation, drifting into the unknown, with no map and no destination, carried across the earth by the herds they followed, the climate that opened the way, and the restless wonder they could never quite silence. Somewhere very far back, a group settled a little beyond where their parents had lived, in land no human had seen before, not because they meant to change the world, but because that was simply where life had led them. And in that one small step, repeated 1,000 times across 1,000 generations, a species walked its way across an entire planet, and never once knew it was on a journey at all.